You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube. We've done it. We are in the last video about Bodie Hodge's delusions about dinosaurs. When last we were here, Bodie was pretending that feathered dinosaurs didn't exist, and whining about a sound of stamps with a fuzzy baby Tyrannosaurus rex. He used a news story based on a paper about adult Tyrannosaurus skin impressions to argue against this. It was really dumb. He's going to continue with that a bit as we turn back to the man of the hour.
You see, there's a narrative out there, and so people do that in the artist illustrations.
It's fun how we did absolutely nothing to show that the illustration in question is actually wrong. The stamp series is actually taking the conclusion of the paper that he referenced third hand into account, which is why their adult Tyrannosaurus don't have feathers, in line with the finding of skin impressions from Y. rex showing reticulate scales in an adult. It's almost like he didn't do anything besides just read the headline of the Smithsonian article, didn't track it back to the peer-reviewed paper, and then never looked into why paleo artists sometimes depict juvenile, but not adult T-Rexes with downy feathers. Which, you know, is what you do if you wanted to not mislead people. It's what I did. Why is it that creationists tend not to do this? Could it once again be their bad relationship with honesty?
Dr. David Minton is quoting and did a lot of research with read a lot of stuff from Dr. Alan Fiducia.
Yes, the man who redefined basically all of Coelurosauria, which would include things like Therizinosaurus, as birds because he couldn't keep denying that they had feathers, and who at this point has basically been laughed out of academia and only clings on the basis of tenure. That's kind of like bragging that you've been studying medicine with Andrew Wakefield, cartography with Eric Dubé, or election procedures with Rudy Giuliani.
Now let me explain who Dr. Alan Fiducia is.
He was once a leading paleoornithologist who didn't like the idea that birds are dinosaurs, and so he dedicated the rest of his career to showing that it wasn't the case, and losing the argument at every turn.
Before I show you this quote in a little bit more detail. Dr. Alan Fiducia is an evolutionist, but he does not believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds. He believes some previous reptile evolved into birds.
Yep, in fact he calls them thecodonts, because he's basically the last person alive using that outdated term, because he refuses to keep up with his own field, a strong sign of pseudoscience, which is why it makes sense that creationists love them so much. Of course, he also keeps a little track of the actual literature on dinosaur paleontology, that he actually fell for an April Fool's joke blog post by real paleontologist Darren Naish, and this blunder made it into one of Fiducia's popular level books. Also, rather hilariously, he absolutely hates how much creationists love him. But hey, he became a pseudoscientist. That's the bet he made, and he gets no sympathy from me for having to lie in it.
So, he is a paleo bird expert, by the way.
I see the amazingly cringy term paleo expert is ironically evolving and diversifying.
So here's what Dr. David Minton did. He summed up Dr. Alan Fiducia and a bunch of his co-workers. He said they presented a substantial body of evidence to support their view that there are in fact no known dinosaurs with feathers.
Look, I have a whole series that's almost 2 hours long, shredding Minton's stupidity. I'll link to it. You can also check the series Arn Ra and Darren Naish did on it, which is also excellent. I don't feel the need to repeat that here.
Now, we're in a technological age. You can hop on Google or Bing and look up dinosaur fossils with feathers on it. And I do this from time to time.
And lots of them show up, making this whole discussion a bit weird.
The same things seem to pop up over and over again. You do find certain dinosaurs over here that have something along the back of the neck, and people sometimes try to justify that as feathers.
I prefer proto-feathers, as these simple filaments are simpler than pretty much any feather on any modern bird, but whatever.
I'm not convinced of that by any means.
Unsurprising, given that Bodie doesn't care about evidence.
But the things that you tend to pop up are like Archaeopteryx or Microraptor Confucius ornis over here.
They're great examples of animals that meet the definition of dinosaur. Even the silly one Bodie uses, as they are clearly bird-like and yet do not meet the definition of member of aves, which is the crown birds.
And if you zoom up to Archaeopteryx here, if you look carefully, this is a cast, but you can still see in here, it had feathers.
Yeah, well, when you Google feathered dinosaurs, you should expect to get animals with feathers on that result.
And they say, ha-ha, look, feathered dinosaurs.
Yeah, it also had an open acetabulum, upright limbs, reduced digits 4 and 5 on the manus, reduced digit 5 on the pes, more than 3 sacral vertebrae firmly attached to each other in a synsacrum and to the sacral arches, etc. You know, all the things that make a dinosaur a dinosaur.
No, those are birds.
If your argument is that birds are not dinosaurs, then you find what are purported dinosaurs with feathers. Saying that they're birds doesn't help, because that's begging the question, aka assume the conclusion in your premise. You have to actually go through the definition of dinosaur and show why these animals don't meet it. But they do. And that's the problem. It's why he won't go through an actual rigorous definition of dinosaur and apply it to animals like Archaeopteryx or Confuciusornis.
You have to understand, they have defined birds as dinosaurs, so when you find a fossilized bird, it's called a fossilized dinosaur now.
Yep, and all you have to do to show that that's not true is get out your trusty definition of dinosaur and show how these birds don't meet it. Except not only do they, but so do modern birds.
See the trick that's going on?
No, I really don't. I see science doing normal science stuff, and then some moron who doesn't know what a dinosaur is complaining that some dinosaurs that are obviously dinosaurs aren't.
I want you to understand there's 3 ways people try to make a missing link. 3. The first is you take birds and you try to make them look like dinosaurs. So they take birds like Archaeopteryx here, and a lot of the artist illustrations, they put dinosaurian features on them.
I would love to know which dinosaur features that don't belong on Archaeopteryx are put on the animal in paleo art.
But it's just a bird. Dr. Alan Fiducia argues this Archaeopteryx up here is nothing but a perching bird. That's all it is. Just leave it at that.
Except it's not a perching bird. It's only a bird under a wide definition, but that doesn't make it not a dinosaur. And the perching part is based on a taphonomic artifact that made digit 1 on the feet look like it was inverted like you find in passerine birds. Turns out, though, it wasn't. It was a normal theropod dewclaw like you find on most dinosaurs. Like me, for example. And again, where are the inappropriate dinosaur features in paleo art? Bodie is basically accusing paleo artists of fraud. I like to see some evidence of that.
The second way to make a missing link is you take the dinosaurs, you try to make them look like birds. So they try to justify putting feathers on there.
That's really easy to justify when the feathers are right there in fossils.
And so you see on the back of the neck here, you see certain little features. They say, hey, maybe this is proto-feathers or the beginning of feathers. Actually, a lot of reptiles have things along the back of their neck. It's not necessarily feathers by any means.
Yeah, but that's also not what was just shown. Those are big iguana scales, not tiny filaments. They're not just on the back of the neck, but all over the place in most cases. In fact, not even Fiducia is so dumb as to propose that these are scales. He knows they're strand-like, and so proposes that they're collagen fibers that remained after the rest of the skin decayed. Of course, the problem with that is that collagen fibers do not have melanosomes, but feathers do, and these filaments in fact contain melanosomes, to the point that in Sinosauropteryx, we have body-wide color information from the protofeathers. Will Bodie talk about this fact? Probably not, but fingers crossed.
But there's a few certain instances where people say, but we see some stuff that looks fibrous in certain little areas.
Including the ones where Bodie thinks that iguana scales are a good match, even though they obviously are not.
So maybe those are proto-fibers or the beginning of fibers.
No, they're definitely fibers. Even Alan Fiducia is on board with that. The question is, are they at all related to feathers?
Okay, so Dr. Alan Fiducia has studied this, wrote a rather technical paper on it, some of his co-workers, and they're looking at those particular fibers. This is probably the most technical part of the whole talk. Don't let it scare you. Here's what it says. The fibers show a striking similarity to the structure and levels of organization of dermal collagen. The proposal that these fibers are protofeathers is dismissed.
He did indeed say that in 2007, but then 3 years later, that claim was entirely debunked with the discovery of melanosomes in these same fibers. Whoops. It's almost like Bodie here isn't bothering to keep up with the whole body of the literature on this topic, and is just cherry-picking papers that agree with his a priori assumptions. Wow, it's like this entry from the list of signs of pseudoscience from Wikipedia. Presentation of old data that seem to support claims, while suppressing or refusing to consider data that conflict with those claims, had come to life in the person of Ken Ham's son-in-law.
Okay, let me put that into plain English. He's saying those fibers you're looking at, they're collagen fibers.
That's not really any more plain than the quote was. What does Bodie think plain English is vis-a-vis the original quote?
Okay, so what's collagen? Collagen's like the glue that holds your tissue and your muscle and your skin together.
Yeah, pretty much. It's also unique to animals, and when Tyrannosaurus rex collagen remains, which were not whole collagen proteins, by the way, were compared to extant animals, they were most similar to bird collagen. Weird, isn't it? That work was done by Dr. Mary Schweitzer, by the way, a Christian and former young Earth creationist.
So let's say I die.
Then I'd be spared from any more of these talks that are, to quote Shakespeare, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
And I start to rot and decay. Ooh, gross, right, guys? I'm like Lazarus after like 3 days, right? Ooh, gross. I get rapidly buried by sediment-rich water, seals out the oxygen, and I get turned into a fossil.
Okay, I'm following so far.
So people come by later and they're digging and, oh, hey, look, we found Bodie. Ooh, Bodie's got proto-feathers. He's turning into a bird.
Well, those collagen fibers, if there are any, sure won't have fossilized melanosomes, So this is a moot point.
Because you're seeing those collagen fibers more pronounced. You see, it's just part of the rotting, decaying flesh. It's not feathers by any means. Third way to make a missing link is fake it.
I smell Archaeoraptor coming.
I want you to understand we're in a culture where people have rejected God and His Word.
Okay, Bodie, you keep telling yourself that while living in basically the most religious, industrialized country in the world.
Being honest, being truthful with the evidence is actually a Christian concept. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of evolutionists, a lot of atheists that want people to be honest with the evidence. And I encourage that, by the way.
Oh, how magnanimous coming from the guy who has been nothing but dishonest with the evidence this whole time. To pinch a line from Aaron Ra, this is the pot calling the silverware black.
But within their own worldview, there's no basis for it. It must be borrowed from a biblical worldview.
Yeah, things like humanism, which Bodie is aware of and which has a consequentialist moral philosophy, can't find any reason why honesty is usually a good policy in science. That's just impossible. Bodie is just going full clown mode.
And so, we do actually find examples of fakes. Do you realize if you can come up with a dinosaur fossil with feathers on it, you could be a millionaire?
Well, since to my knowledge that has never happened to anyone, I'm going to say that not only am I not aware of that it's just flat wrong.
Yeah, people are going to try it. One of the most popular fakes was called Archaeoraptor.
Called it.
All the way back in the year 2000. If you look at the history of this, the reviewer spotted that this was a faked fossil 3 months in advance.
Hence why no paleontologist is willing to publish it, and it never actually entered the paleontology literature, only being published in National Geographic, which is not a peer-reviewed publication.
National Geographic published it anyway, and then later had to do the retraction.
Exactly, because not a single scientist bought it. But ironically, even though Archaeoraptor was a hoax, it was a hoax that included a real feathered dinosaur, Microraptor. So the find is still that of a transitional fossil, just not the one the guy who first published the composite thought it was. Because remember, this fossil was actually two real fossils stuck together with glue, meaning that the two sections from different animals were each real fossils. The feathers weren't fake, they were real. And you know what is in the literature? That Microraptor fossil.
But people are getting better at their fakes. Better and better, and there's more and more of them.
Yeah, and it's a problem, but let's remember, these aren't nefarious scientists faking fossils in a lab to prove evolution. No scientists are still out there trying to prove evolution any more than there are scientists trying to prove that fire depends on oxygen, or that the Earth is round. These fossils are being faked by farmers in rural China who are just trying to get out of grinding poverty. They don't care at all about young Earth creationism or evolution, really. And they've probably never heard about young Earth creation. They just know that the more complete a fossil is, the better price they can get for it. So they stick some real fossils together in a way that looks reasonably convincing at first glance, and then they get some money.
In fact, the secular world is lamenting this, and I agree with them on this. Scientific American and Science Magazine, they're frustrated by this. Scientific American comments here on a Science Magazine study. These are both secular journals. They said an investigative report published in Science in 2010 revealed that as many as 80% of marine reptile fossils on display in Chinese museums have been altered or manipulated.
Wow, it's a good thing that paleontology papers aren't based on Chinese museum displays then.
People are getting better at it. They lament this. I agree with them. In fact, people have been writing all these different technical papers on how to spot the fakes. Breaks my heart that that's happening.
Same, but it's a bit rich coming from the guy who works for a museum that has an intentionally misleading reconstruction of Australopithecus africanus, depicting it as a quadruped despite that being biomechanically impossible for numerous reasons.
But here's the thing. When we go out there and we find these different dinosaur fossils, we find these fossils were scaly creatures.
Except when they're not.
Right there, we find skin imprints and so forth. How do you change a scale into a feather?
Well, first, they didn't evolve from squamate scales, so this is already a straw man. but they evolved by invagination of skin structures like placodes, which then formed a circular follicle that extruded a hollow filament, and then the expression of developmental genes split the filament into multiple smaller filaments, and now we're basically at downy feathers. And you can get to the hollow filament in an alligator embryos just by changing how much and when certain hormones are present in the developing animal. Interestingly, scales, feathers, and hair all develop from embryonic placodes, which makes sense in terms of evolution.
They grow totally different. Scales are like folds in the skin.
Yeah, if they didn't grow differently, they wouldn't be different structures. Tautologies aren't really good arguments, creationists.
We find skin imprint. I showed you that one of the T-Rex earlier. Here's one from a hadrosaur. Scaly creatures. This is a cat, of course. How do you change scales into a feather?
It's all down to the timing of developmental genes.
Hey, kids, have you ever played with a snake skin?
I mean, I've held one. Does that count?
But you can see they're little folds in the skin, okay? That's totally different than the way a feather grows. A feather actually grows out of a follicle, like your hair. Your hair grows out of a follicle. Hey, kid, you ever pull one of your hairs out?
Yeah, because scales and feathers aren't the same, so they don't grow the same way. That's kind of the point. This is just, how could evolution result in different structures if the structures are different?
Now, here was something that was found. They published this in New Scientist back in March of 2012. Beautiful, beautiful find. Look at this. Fossilized feathers. You can't miss them. They're gorgeous. You see the vein?
Those are Longisquama scales, not feathers.
Ah, absolutely gorgeous. But notice the caption. They look like feathers. You know what the conclusion of the paper was? That these are not true feathers.
Yeah, because they're not. Bodie clearly didn't read the paper. The scales in question aren't even filamented. They're corrugated, like corrugated metal plating. And they even lose this vague resemblance to feathers at the distal end. Further, this is the skeleton of Longisquama. I don't think Bodie would identify this as a bird. What point is he trying to make by showing scales that look like feathers from a distance if you squint?
They thought those collagen fibers are true feathers, but they said these aren't.
No, they say those integumentary filaments that have melanosomes, something collagen does not have, were protofeathers, and that these corrugated scales are corrugated scales. And this from Bodie is just an argument from incredulity. The fact that Bodie doesn't know enough about the relevant paleontology to understand why experts come to the conclusions that they have come to doesn't do anything at all to call those conclusions into question.
Why would they possibly do that? Here's why.
Because they found melanosomes in those fibers, and the scales don't even have filaments. Next, Bodie's just going to propose what amounts to a conspiracy theory without ever actually addressing the evidence surrounding either the protofeathers or the Longisquama scales. Nor is he going to point out that the skeleton of Longisquama in no way could possibly be that of a bird. He's just going to pretend its dorsal scales were found in isolation. I'm not going to air him making wild conspiracy accusations without evidence. It's insulting to the paleontologists, to anyone who cares about science, and to my audience. Remember, proposing a conspiracy theory doesn't relieve the burden of proof on the person proposing it. It just means that they now must meet an additional burden of proof of demonstrating the conspiracy. He says that the basis of this is that since Longisquama is Triassic, they can't be feathers. Okay, that's not the basis used in the papers to show they're not feathers, and he doesn't actually deal with the claims of the papers.
Here's something else that was found. A theropod dinosaur was found to eat birds.
Yeah, dinosaurs eat other dinosaurs. This isn't really news.
Now, what you understand, it's the theropod dinosaurs that supposedly evolved into birds, and they go out there, they find this theropod. This is published in a secular journal, PLOS ONE, and you look in here, and there's stomach contents that got preserved as well. And so they can go up and they can do studies on that, like, well, what did it eat? What was its last couple of meals here? And they can identify those bones. They were from different birds. So how's it that theropods evolved into birds when birds are already around being eaten by theropods?
Because birds are only one branch of Theropoda and were contemporary with many other branches of that very wide group of organisms up until the end of the Cretaceous period. You know, saying if humans evolved from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys, doesn't become a better argument if you change it to, if birds evolved from theropods, then how could they be eaten by other theropods?
You see, when you start looking at the details, it is impossible to change a dinosaur into a bird.
Weird how none of these details preventing dinosaurs from evolving into other dinosaurs were presented, nor were we ever shown what makes birds not dinosaurs. It's like there's a theme in these dinosaur talks of one, never defining dinosaurs, and two, never comparing birds to any definition of dinosaurs, which is really all that's needed to show if birds are dinosaurs. Once you do that, you can ask the separate question of whether birds could share ancestry with other non-avian dinosaurs, and if so, how?
Now, to the world's defense, not everyone out there believes dinosaurs evolved into birds.
Yeah, some people are wrong.
The second most popular view is that some sort of comet or asteroid or impactor came in and killed all the dinosaurs.
What? Those aren't contradictory stances. Birds are just what we call a small group of dinosaurs who survived that. I'm not aware of any contingent of scientists who are rejecting the Chicxulub impact because birds are dinosaurs. What is Bodie even talking about?
Killed a few other things, but by and large, it's a lot of things were left alive and the dinosaurs didn't make it.
It killed between 50 and 80% of all species on Earth, and likely over 90% of all individuals alive at the time of impact. That's not the dinosaurs and a few other things. That's half to 4/5 of everything. Even most of the birds and mammals died.
Now, sometimes people try to combine these models. It kills off just about everything, and then this one line maybe evolves into birds, so they try to do that.
No, birds evolved in the Jurassic and were well established in the Cretaceous, and most of them went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. They were just one of the groups that had members that held on, like mammals, sea turtles, and crocodilians, most of whom were also annihilated. These are in no way different models. The asteroid wasn't some magical space rock specifically targeting dinosaurs. It's just that the dinosaurs that escaped had some common characteristics, like flight, allowing them to be better able to search for the scarce food available, a small body size allowing them to not need much of that scarce food, and a bit of luck. And so 4 lineages of dinosaurs escaped into the Paleogene, and we call that collection birds.
But there's problems with this. Why would it essentially kill all the dinosaurs and hardly anything else?
Yeah, let's ignore that it did kill all the mosasaurs, the pterosaurs, the plesiosaurs, nearly all the sphenodonts, nearly all the mammals, most of the crocodilians, all the ammonites, all the belemnites, most lizards, most insects, most plants, most sharks, and all the choristoderans. It was just the dinosaurs.
I've seen some technical papers said dinosaurs died of disease.
Oh no, before the Alvarez impact hypothesis was well demonstrated, people were still searching for what killed the dinosaurs. And yes, before anyone mentions it, the Deccan traps in India weren't helping either.
I saw another one that said they starved to death. Saw another one that said they overate.
See my last interjection.
You wouldn't believe one of the later views. If I told you, you would not believe me. Here's the press headline. Dinosaurs gassed themselves into extinction, British scientists say.
For f***'s sake, that's a Matt Powell-level moron take. That's Fox News, you'll notice, not a peer-reviewed paper. The paper they're referencing wasn't about extinction and didn't even concern itself with the end Cretaceous. It said that sauropod flatulence in the Jurassic may have contributed to the warming climate observed throughout the Jurassic. Fox just lied, and Bodie swallowed it without doing the barest effort to fact-check it. Even for Bodie, this is bad. Is he going to start asking about the air in space, too?
Yeah.
But we know electrons exist because we can utilize them all the time, like we're doing right now.
Sure. But in space, wouldn't it be a different scenario based on the fact that, the space and the air in the space is much different than the air we have here in our area. So I mean, it's just, we have to take that into consideration. There's so many things you'd have to take into consideration because we are not. I mean, if we went into space, we'd suffocate.
And it means exactly what you think it means.
No, it doesn't, which he might know if he could fact-check a single thing. Wasn't this just the same piece of shit who was telling us how great it was to be honest with the data? Well, where's that honesty now? Oh right, it's nowhere because Bodie is a hypocritical little stain who wouldn't know how to read a scientific paper if it were stapled onto his eyeballs. How am I supposed to maintain any charity for these professional creationists when they refuse to do the most basic level of verification to see if they're just telling lies to their audience or not? This is a real question. I'm sometimes told I'm too harsh on them, especially more recently. But what am I supposed to do when Bodie tells me that scientists concluded that dinosaurs farted themselves to death when they said absolutely no such thing and he didn't even bother to check, but just bought a headline from Fox News of all places? He might as well point to goddamn Bat Boy as an example of why evolution is fake. Then on the other hand, I spend almost 7 hours looking into Hebrew lexicons trying to read Syriac, which has a whole bunch of alphabets, none of which I even know, and consulting with an actual expert on Hebrew to figure out what's going on with dragons in the Bible. The bullshit asymmetry principle has never been more obvious to me.
Dinosaurs gave off so much flatulence that it affected the climate, and climate change led to the demise of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, except for that last part.
Press was all over them. I saw one. Dinosaurs tooted themselves to death. And
the fact that Bodie fell for this absurdly bad science reporting reflects nothing on the scientist doing the work and simply shows what an absolute numbskull he is. The guy must have the brain power of a moldy mayonnaise, and apparently not because of some medical condition. This brainlessness seems to be an active choice. Imagine thinking that what you should do with your life is being as absolutely imbecilic as you can get away with. I'm done with Bodie talking about dinosaur extinction since he clearly won't even try to be right about it. Just know that he blames it on sin, because of course he does.
All right, is there any evidence that confirms man and dinosaurs lived together? Besides, say, the Bible or some of these dragon accounts. Actually, there's quite a bit. It's called cave drawings, etchings, paintings, and so forth.
All right, let's see it.
Here's one out at Havasupai Canyon. This is one of the side canyons off the Grand Canyon, discovered in the 1800s. This creature etched out here alongside other stuff. It actually looks surprisingly similar to an Edmontosaurus type of dinosaur.
Only if you don't know what an Edmontosaurus is. That's a bird, so yes, it's a dinosaur, but no, it's not Edmontosaurus. Also, I like the tacit admission that the Bible isn't really evidence.
Here's one out at Natural Bridges National Monument. Of course, these stir up controversy, but this one looks a lot like a sauropod type of dinosaur.
Yeah, it stirs up controversy because creationists lie about it. It's not even one drawing, it's a bunch of different separate drawings, and only pareidolia combined with Photoshop make people think otherwise.
Here's another one out at San Rafael Swell in Utah.
Nope, that's two different humans with what seems to be a river. And even if it were a single creature, what makes it not just a bird?
Looks kind of like a flying reptile.
Yeah, only if you pretend it's a single figure.
And it's interesting, the world, they see these and they're like, oh no, this isn't it. And they'll put it into programs like D-Stretch or Photoshop.
You mean like AIG just did with their enhanced versions? Bodie can go f*** himself with his dishonest bullshit. He doesn't get to finish that sentence after pulling the exact he's accusing actual scientists of.
Here's one up at Lake Superior in Canada. You see a boat in the background, I always like that. And you can see a lot of dinosaurs had things along the back of their neck like that.
It doesn't even vaguely resemble a dinosaur. It's a water panther, a scaly cat monster with spikes on its back and bison horns. It's another one of those things that never existed, and even if it had, it wouldn't be a dinosaur.
Down in Australia, the Aborigines had this painted up of a creature that they'd hunted because it had eaten one of their kinsmen, so they drew the kinsman inside here, and they were sitting there trying to go after it because they wanted to get their kinsman back. They named it Yaru. Of course, that's a water creature. Technical definition would not include it as a dinosaur.
This is literally a tracing of a scientific reconstruction that was printed in a modern children's book. The outline is exactly the same.
Over in Angkor in Cambodia, there was a temple, whole section of temples and structures found, and one of them, there at Ta Prohm, they found what looks like a muzzled stegosaur. This is being battled out in the peer review. They think they've found a second one of these as well, so it's pretty exciting to see this.
The only thing even vaguely Stegosaurus-like about this carving is the thing being interpreted as plates. Stegosaurus had a long, stiff horizontal tail and a long neck, and no horns or ears like this animal has. Further, the carving is in a series of carvings going up vertically of various other animals all in front of a plant design, and when in context, it's clear that the so-called plates of this animal are actually the plant design in the background, leaving literally nothing Stegosaurus-like about the animal.
The Ishtar Gate in Babylon, built by order of Nebuchadnezzar, has this and an auroch, an extinct type of cattle that alternate going up. Look at this. It's got a reptilian tongue, scales, hip structure so that it raises its body up off the ground. By technical definition, that's a dinosaur right there.
Says the guy who never gave a technical definition for a dinosaur. It also has the hind feet of an eagle and the forefeet of a lion, which are not scaly, by the way, and it has buffalo horns. That's not a dinosaur that anyone has ever found. So no, this isn't a dinosaur, it's a chimera. If it were a dinosaur, Bodie would at least attempt to give an identification. And it's not like it has to look much like the dinosaur in question for Bodie to attempt to identify it. Remember his laughable attempt to say that a circle with two lines coming from the bottom and a curve coming from the top was an Edmontosaurus? Yeah, the fact he's not even trying here should tell you he doesn't believe his own bullshit.
So we see hosts of different examples of things like this as well.
Yeah, there sure are hosts of things that don't look like dinosaurs that creationist grifters will tell gullible audiences do look like dinosaurs in order to convince them that non-avian dinosaurs survived into historical times under the mistaken impression that this would somehow be a problem for evolution.
If we flip towards science, what are these? Do you guys know what these are?
Those are mammalian blood cells. You can tell because unlike other vertebrate red blood cells, they have no nucleus.
Yeah, red blood cells. Red blood cells don't last very long.
Says who? Under what conditions? You can't just make blanket statements like that. Bones don't really last long normally, but then sometimes they get preserved indefinitely. It's almost like there's nuance in science, and simple questions like how long does X last doesn't have a simple answer.
Now, there was a researcher, Dr. Mary Schweitzer.
Again, a Christian and former young Earth creationist, yes.
Out west, they'd found this T-Rex femur. It's kind of down in a ravine. They couldn't get it out, so they brought a helicopter in. Well, it wouldn't fit on the helicopter. So they decided to do something nobody had done before. They took that T-Rex femur, broke it in half.
Fossils that cannot be moved without breaking are usually broken for transport. It's a sad necessity, but this is not the first time it happened.
put it on the helicopter, took it back to the lab. They got in there, let's take a look. And lo and behold, they found some preserved red blood cells.
They didn't. They found iron that looked like red blood cells, and Dr. Schweitzer never reported them as being red blood cells, and said at most that they were morphologically consistent with red blood cells. They did, however, find other things like degraded and iron cross-linked collagen, as well as heme-derived porphyrins, as well as fossilized osteocytes. So that's fun.
Now, they were in shock. They were like, there is no way red blood cells could last like 65 to 68 million years old. There's just no way.
It was more about the collagen and osteocytes than the maybe, but not actually red blood cells.
So you know what they said? Wow, I guess red blood cells really do last 65, 68 million years old.
Yeah, because the other answer was basically, oh gee, I guess astronomy, biology, geology, nuclear physics, thermodynamics, radiology, and chemistry are all wrong. And then they found a preservation method involving iron cross-linking, and lo and behold, that was confirmed with other fossils and in the lab. You know, lab work. The kind of thing creationists like, at least when it suits them.
But since then, they've cracked open some more T-Rex bones, and they found some soft tissue.
What do you mean, since then? They found it then, in that find. And more since then, sure, but it's also not fresh, soft tissue like you might find at the butcher's. It's only soft after soaking in acid for weeks, and even then it's not the original chemicals that made up the tissues. It's been chemically altered, which preserved it. In fact, it is cross-linked, which is the basic method that formaldehyde uses to preserve organic material. Once proteins are linked together by formaldehyde or iron, it's pretty hard to break them apart, and they can last basically indefinitely.
Some of it was stretchy. There's a video online of this very first photo where it kind of stretches and pulls across. It gave off an odor.
That's true.
They found a vein. I know some creationists that cracked open a triceratops horn, and they found soft tissue as well.
That was Mark Armitage.
Oh, hi, Mark.
A guy so incompetent that he couldn't document the dig site, couldn't document the horn, didn't provide an analysis that it was actually a triceratops horn, didn't publish in a paleontology journal, instead choosing to publish in a microscopy journal, and has since fractured and dissolved much of the horn, so we probably can never tell what it was. But some other material he found associated with the find were more consistent with the extinct species bison latifrons than with Triceratops horridus, leading myself and others to ask, what makes anyone think this isn't a bison horn? Mark's laughably dumb response is that the bison horns don't have a bone core, which is, you know.
And I got some nice SEM photos here. You zoom up to this one. They're looking inside of a vein, and you're seeing crystalline material.
Yeah, up in the vein of probably a few 100,000-year-old bison horn. If Johnny's best friend, Mark, would like to dispute that, he's welcome to show his actual measurements and phylogenetic analysis that led him to assign the horns to Triceratops horridus, and maybe also publish a proper site map.
Now, let me ask you, does it make more sense this is a matter of thousands of years old as opposed to, say, 60 to 70 million years old?
For your dumbass bison horn? Sure, why not?
I think it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, but Bodie also thinks that this looks like an Edmontosaurus, so, you know. And that's where it just ends. No great conclusion or summary, it just fades to black like a bad student film. Although I'll admit that the sound effect was added by me to drive home that amateurish production choice. Well, if you enjoyed the video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovind, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Elron Teller, Phil Havara, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Mrs. Spexinder, Sphincter of Doom, and the Venerable Bede. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.